specific commitments only bind members or state parties to the extent of that commitment or these commitments. And commitments in the protocol can be entered in terms of sectors and mode of supply. Modes of supply. So you may decide to liberalize one sector, only you liberalizing one mode within that sector. Just like you can decide to liberalize all the 4 modes in one specific sector. So you are free to liberalize the way you want it to regulate for the pursuit of legitimate objectives. So, Article 18, So the protocol provides for progressive liberalization because there is an understanding that members cannot liberalize at one shot. So they must be encouraged to do so progressively by giving them opportunities to meet in different rounds of negotiations to remove the remaining obstacles or remaining regulations. So this is also in connection with the fact that members are free to introduce and maintain regulations. So to encourage them to remove these regulations and liberalize, you have to give them time to do so. And the protocols provide for this to happen. So they ask them to engage in successive rounds of negotiations with the aim of achieving the liberalization ultimately, which they actually have in mind. The protocols also says, and we will see the commitments before, that if you have undertaken commitments today, well, you are not. This is not frozen. You may decide in the future to undertake additional commitments in the same sectors, and if previous mode of supply were restricted, you might decide in the future to remove barriers to the supply of services in these modes that were previously restricted. Article 23 of the protocols also say members are free to modify. But it's not that free. You can do so within 3 years after scheduling their concessions. So you can do so. However, the modification of schedule triggers other negotiations because the rationale here is that if countries have been to a liberalized market, if you can say mode 1 is open, and in the future you say, no, I don't want to do that anymore, then of course people are losing market access, right? So you need to compensate for that loss of market access. So it will trigger the procedures of negotiations with members. So how do members schedule their commitments? Well, in the trade and services area, there are 2 ways of scheduling commitments that exist, that have been codified. The first mode is the negative lease approach, and the second mode is the positive lease approach. So in the case of negative lease approach, which is not our case, in the case of a negative lease approach, you list it or lose it. In other words, the presumption is that everything has been liberalized. Unless you specifically say so. However, there is another positive lease approach, which is the WTO approach, that says you are only committed to the extent of your commitment. So it's a positive listing. Nothing is liberalized unless you actually specifically commit to liberalize this. And the ESG-SGA follows the GATS approach. So, what are the sectors? Because the sectors are the ones we are talking about here. The liberalization mode of supply only comes because there are sectors that have been liberalized. And this is really defined here as one or all sectors or subsectors or any combination of that. Okay? And if you don't specify, because sometimes you will see the classification here, sometimes the sector doesn't have necessarily subsectors or subsectors. There may be simply one sector, that's all. So it can be that sector alone, or it could be that sector and other subsectors below that sector. So this is when we talk about a sector, you have to clearly look at which one that country is referring to in their schedule. So, the AFCFTA state parties have so far at least addressed entered commitment, or they decided that they will negotiate initially in 5 priority sectors. And the priority sectors are the following: business services, communication services, financial services, tourism and travel services, and transportation services. So these are the 5 priority sectors which members identified as forming the basis of their initial offer, and that they will concentrate their negotiations on in the meantime, before they can open up to other services in the future. Remember, we said that the protocols applies to all services, present services and even future services that will be discovered by our grandchildren. So, these are the priority sectors. So this is where members have concentrated their energy so far to liberalize their commitment. So how are commitments, what are the specific commitments we are talking about? So this is governed. The first one is market access. So they cannot be traded, whether in goods or in services, if there is no market access, if you cannot grant market access to foreign product or foreign service suppliers to come in and supply their service. Because even for mode 1, 2, 3, and 4 to happen, there must be market access for them. Even though this is how services are traded, you must first authorize these services to be traded by granting them market access. So in this case, Article 19 clearly says that members shall give service suppliers of other member states market access. They must do so subject to the conditions that they themselves say on the condition that which these services can be traded. So if you want to restrict, add any conditions as to how you want to grant a specific service or service supplier in your jurisdiction, you must specify which conditions they have to meet or under which conditions they are admitted within your jurisdiction. This is the essence of Article 9, Paragraph 1. Because this is very important. This is only where you can restrict this. As we will see, Paragraph 2 says you cannot use certain measures. The Paragraph 1 says if you are going to restrict market access, use this opportunity in Article 19, Paragraph 1. You specifically say the conditions under which you will you admit service suppliers of foreign origin. This is the essence of Article 19, Paragraph 1. Market access, very important. So, Paragraph 2 says that once you've granted market access under the conditions that you have specified, you cannot take the following measures afterwards. So once you've specified the conditions under which you admit services suppliers of foreign origin, and they agree that these are the conditions, you can no longer resort to this mechanism. To this Paragraph 2 of Article 19, you cannot limit the number of transactions they may undertake. You cannot limit the number of service suppliers that will be allowed in your jurisdiction in this regard. Because your schedule already says that you are limiting it. But if you don't limit at that level, you cannot use the measure afterwards. Because Paragraph 1 gives you the opportunity to limit the number of service suppliers if you want. Now, if you miss the opportunity of doing that, you cannot later on resort to these type of measures to limit the number of service suppliers that are allowed within your jurisdiction. You cannot limit the amount of transactions, the value of transactions they are allowed to carry out. So you cannot say, as a bank, you can only, after having not restricted that, you can only have exercise or transact in a certain amount per year. This will be limiting, which is something you had the opportunity of doing by using Paragraph 1. You cannot limit the total quantity. These are quantitative restrictions in a way, right? Similar to what obtains in the case of goods. Let's say you cannot limit the quantity of goods that can be imported because this is illegal from a protocol on trading goods perspective. The same applies in the case of services. That says you cannot limit that quantity of service output. You can also not limit the number of natural persons that may be employed by that service supplier which you granted market access to. So if you say, if you are going to limit that, you have to schedule it in your commitment. But once you miss the opportunity of scheduling in putting the conditions of admission, you can no longer resort to say, well, I said no, none in my ground, but now I have the feeling that no, you are misbehaving. I want to restrict that. No, that would be illegal from that perspective of Article 19, paragraph 2. So these are the, and this is an exhaustive list of measures which a member cannot take. This is, if it's not codified, the member can do it. But since these ones are mentioned, expressly mentioned, they are expressly forbidden, right? So you can take other measures which are not mentioned here, but I think they have thought about all of them that you cannot do when it comes to market access restrictions. So the reading here is saying to say that paragraph 1 grants you the opportunity to admit goods or services and service suppliers within your jurisdiction under your conditions that you have actually spelled out. So you set the conditions, and once you set these conditions, you can no longer resort to this type of measures, because this will be illegal from paragraph 1 perspective. So, national treatment is another specific commitment in the protocol on services. So unlike national treatment in the case of goods, which is a general obligation, in the case of services, it's a specific commitment. So you are not obliged to grant national treatment in the services sector unless you specifically say that you will do so. So you have to also commit to respect national treatment for you to be bound by this commitment. You're only bound to the extent of your commitments. So the so the national treatment says clearly that in sectors, so clearly it's only in the sectors which a member has inscribed in their schedule and subject to the same conditions, any of them, which that member has actually set, and qualifications which that member has set themselves. Each member is only then that you are obliged. So if you are going to limit national treatment, you have to schedule it also. You must put the conditions under which you will grant national treatment. For instance, by simply not scheduling a sector or mode of supply, because you're only bound to the extent of your commitments. So you may decide not to schedule a commitment, then that's fine. But if you schedule a commitment in a sector and a mode of supply, then you will not be allowed to treat foreign service supplier less favorably than how you treat your own like service and service suppliers. This was the essence of national treatment. And if I ask you then, to speak about like service and service suppliers, so let me ask you this. Okay, what does that mean? What does that mean? Like services and like service suppliers and service suppliers. Like services and service suppliers. Because as you know, likeness has been given rise to a lot of disputes in international trade. So I'm just asking us to think about that. I think your hand was up. I thought you. Who wants to explain to us what they mean when they say like service and like service supplier? What are the criteria that are used here?
Maybe I can talk about like services and like service suppliers in a way that when you look at clearing and forwarding, we have, say in Uganda, we have path clearers and forwarders. When it comes to TZ, you'll find the same company doing the same work. Now you'll have multiple entities doing that same job in different countries, but there are national entities and non-national entities, but they are doing the same job, doing the same service, and it would be wrong for you to treat a non-national company differently from the way you treat that is country-based. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, if a follow-up question then, will we say that like service suppliers necessarily supply like services? Again, I repeat, would you say that like service suppliers are necessarily supplying like services? Is it because they are like service suppliers that their services are like?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily?
Yes.
Why? Can you elaborate? Because you are giving me a lawyer answers there. Not necessarily. It depends, but please elaborate.
I can say it this way, that still maintaining the clearing and forwarding. They are like service suppliers because they are dealing in clearing and forwarding as a general context. But then you can break it down and you find that whatever they are doing may be sector specific, or they are dealing in particular kinds of items. So the services are different. But they are in the same sector generally.
Okay, but if you are going to challenge national treatment, are you going to compare different services?
You will treat them under...
No, if you are going to compare, if you say the national treatment is not respected, you're talking vis-a-vis a specific sector, right? Mm-hmm. So are you going to use different sectors to say that you're being discriminated against?
I'll use the same sector because I am looking at a country-based company doing the same service, and me who is not a country-based company, but doing a service which is the same as the national company is doing.
So you are saying one country, one service can supply different services that are not like, yet you still rely on that to say you are being discriminated against. That's what you are saying, basically.
No, that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there may be a national company clearing medicine, medicine-related services and supplies, and a non-company doing the same. Then it all falls under service suppliers.
Yeah. Yes, but my question was, would you simply argue that because they are like service suppliers, that their services are also like? And you are saying no. Then I ask you, if you are saying no, okay, on which basis then do you base your the violation of a national treatment if these services are not like? Because if it only addresses like services.
I'll seek assistance on that.
I think, yeah, microphone.
When you started the presentation, did you not say that for specific commitments, it's in two categories, the supply and the sectors? Mm-hmm. And so if it's the sector, then you'd be looking at whether there's what you were saying.
Commitments?
The commitment, you can look at it based on the sectors. It's either you're looking at it based on the sectors or based on the supply. Okay. So it could be either. Sometimes people may be in the same sector and they may not necessarily be producing the same thing, but it's within a certain sector. And then sometimes it may be different sectors, but it's the produce is like a particular supply.
If it's not the same sector and you are claiming violation, then on which ground are you basing your claim? If you are yourself saying our services are not like, then
you're within the same sector, and it's the specific commitment. You said at the beginning that it was based on either the supply or the sectors. So once you're within a sector and you feel like you're getting a different treatment, and you've both there's a rule on the specific commitment and it's within a particular sector, then you can say, hey, I'm within this sector and I'm being discriminated against because when it comes to this sector, in terms of specific commitment, this is what we are supposed to enjoy. That's how it...
Okay, I think I will answer that. Dave, please go ahead.
Yeah, so you look at both, the similarity in the sector, and then also the nature of the service. So maybe if I can use lawyers, for instance, we are all lawyers, but there are those who specialize in maybe conveyancing, and there are those who specialize in litigation or something like that. I'm just using it as an example. So yes, the sector is same legal, but the nature of the service is what differs. So if you are discriminating somebody based on that, on the two, first you look at, the sector, and then now look at the nature of the service. What service are they supplying?
Okay, remember we mentioned that you can schedule commitment in terms of sector and subsectors.
Yes.
So we are talking about conveyancing. Then what if both of you are providing conveyancing services?
Then you should be treated. You should provide national treatment to them, because you're supposed to treat that foreign service supplier as you would treat your local service supplier.
Then my question is, two like service, a presumption that like service supplier supply like services.
You must demonstrate so. If you're the one claiming to be discriminated against, then you must be able to demonstrate that the service you're supplying, first of all, belongs in this sector or subsector, and it is similar. To the nature of it is similar to what is being supplied by the local supplier.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. I would want to link, this to movement of persons, since services are normally, carried out by persons. So if you are saying that we should treat a state party, should treat other, members from other, countries, same as to treat its, own people, then can we also say that when it comes to movement or persons, the state party should also consider treating people who are coming to. I am passionate about movement, so I'm saying that can the state party also treat other citizens same as, because it is the persons who are going to undertake those services. So can we make, even though we say there's free movement, but I think there's no free movement. Can we therefore say that if we lack the movement, then we will also defeat, this Article 20?
Okay. Again, the premise is that this is a specific commitment, and you only are bound by this commitment to subject to any conditions and qualifications, and of course subject to conditions and qualifications, right? So if you want to restrict, let's use the example, you want to restrict national treatment. If you say, I want to prefer my nationals over foreign, you will put that here. You will restrict market access and national treatment. You will not shed on it. Does it make sense now? So that's where you are allowed to do so. Once you forfeit that right that you have to limit, then you can no longer use it because you did not include these conditions. Then you are bound not to treat the foreign service suppliers unfavorably.
Where the other country will also say that they are also going to retaliate since you have decided to restrict maybe my people from new business.
With your people, I also restrict that.
But you can do that afterwards. So if you do that afterwards, that's a violation. You can do that before. You can put it in your schedule. So if it's a supervening event, if you are doing it after having concluded, you remember this is not what you agreed previously. So you are creating a condition of violation of your commitment yourself by simply deciding to simply backslide from what you was committed before. So if you do afterwards, this is no longer your commitment. You are in violation of your obligations. If you retaliate because you did not pay attention enough to see that that member had restricted their market access, and you later only found that it was the case, you cannot afterwards decide to do that, unless you trigger the provision on modification of your schedule.
Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah, you can trigger that condition, that provision, but that will mean only after 3 years. You can't do that immediately. You have to wait 3 years since the previous schedule was agreed.
But the party or the state party who feels aggrieved can also put impediments on what do you call it, the ways of maybe your citizens. So, for instance, if I am aware that I have 3 years to amend my schedule, I can also put impediments on there. For instance, when it comes to registration or getting any legal means to do your service or offer your service, I can also put some impediments on your way.
But if you do that after 3 years, again, the time frame is with after 3 years, not within 3 years. It's after 3 years. So you can do that after 3 years, and if you do so, it will trigger the modification of schedule issue. But also, you have to compensate other people from their market for a loss of market access, because what you promised was something else from what you are actually proposing to do in the future. Which means that they have relied previously on the liberalized market, which now you are now proposing to close. So you have to compensate for that loss.
Now, an example is what I saw on social media, yesterday, where South Africans were intimidating Ghanaians and sacking them to go to their country, and even to the extent of even beating them. So, for instance, if maybe I've rectified this treaty, and a South African company wants to come and do, let's say, business in Ghana, I know I have 3 years to amend my schedule. But what I will do is that, for instance, if you need a stay permit,
we delay that.
We will frustrate you. That's the retaliation I'm talking about.
But why would you, as a state, grant market access just to restrict it a couple of months afterwards?
Because I've realized you are doing the same to my people.
Doing same how? They're also in violation. If they are restricting market access, you have to follow the law, right? The rule of law. What did they commit to do?
If I think it will take a longer period.
Let's stick to what the protocol says, right? You are getting me into other issues, which I definitely don't want to entertain now. The protocol is very clear about national treatment. So if you want to close the sector, you are not forced to do it. You can decide that you would not liberalize in this sector. Nobody forces you. Which is why the protocol encourages people to meet regularly to remove this obstacle. So you are not obliged to do that when everybody else is doing. You can decide to postpone your liberalization to a future date. So yeah, there is no obligation on your part to actually negotiate or liberalize a specific sector or mode of supply. Because again, as I said, schedule can be entered as you can liberalize in sectors and in mode of supply. Within one sector, you can decide to only liberalize one mode of supply. You remember the 4 modes of supply we covered in the morning. So you can decide to in whatever sector that you will only liberalize one sector, one mode of supply, and that the rest is not liberalized. Or you may decide to liberalize all the 4 modes of supply. So it's up to you, the state, to choose in regard to and take into account your national objectives. So, yes.
So, are you saying that this can only be applied for trade and services? We can't do something similar for trade and goods to restrict somewhat? Because I'm thinking, I like the idea of this in the sense that sometimes maybe a country may be on a certain path in terms of development. And so in as much as, let's say, you're a party to AFTA, you may be trying to develop a certain part of your industry at home. So not that at the beginning you are closing everybody. Maybe at the beginning you want to close people off a little bit and develop your sector internally, like domestically. And then after 3 years, perhaps through modification, if it were to be in trade and services, you open it up a bit. So is there some kind of chance of you doing that for the trading goods as well?
Okay, when it comes to trading goods, of course, countries do negotiate. When you talk about scheduling commitment concessions in goods, these are sectors which you decide to remove barriers under. You remember in the modalities for negotiating trading goods, there were percentages which are assigned to categories of. The key issue was the sensitivity of the sector, right? If a sector is too sensitive for you, you may decide to liberalize it at a later stage, or never at all. So this is possible. It was possible in the AFCFTA protocol on trading goods as well. Okay, let's continue. Scheduling services, like I said, market access and national treatments are used by to either liberalize or restrict markets. In order to schedule commitments, you have to look at the classification of that service. Where does it fit, right? In the course of negotiations of the Uruguay round of the General Agreement on Trading Services for the WTO, the Secretariat drawn out a list which is known as WTO 120, which is used for negotiations under the WTO. There is also a UN classification, the Central Product Classification, which classifies not only goods but also services that can be traded. So these are also used for scheduling goods as well, the UNCPC, and also for the negotiations of services. So this is a system of classification of products that can be traded, and it includes goods and services. So this is used to schedule commitment. Okay? It is used to schedule commitment because you may simply, if you use a code, a wrong code, referring to a service which you thought was liberalizing or not being liberalized, meanwhile it was the opposite, you may end up in a situation where somebody says, well, this is what it was written in your schedule. You cannot now say that this is not what you intended, because we don't work with intent. We work with what is written, right? So if you chose a wrong code, thinking of another sector, it might jeopardize your ability to claim you were not liberalizing that sector. So there is no hierarchy as to which system prevails over the other, but people are encouraged to, in the course of scheduling their commitment, to detail the exact sector or subsector that they intend to liberalize, so that there is no doubt as to what their intention is. So the CPC is used to schedule commitments in sectors which countries are intend to liberalize. So this is an example of classification of services. You remember we said that the AFCFTA has identified 5 priority sectors. Within these 5 priority sectors, you have business services. And business services has also subsectors. And you can, professional services fall under business services. And below professional services, you have a number of professional services, such as legal services. So legal services is a professional service below business services. So this is one of the categorization of services. So whenever countries want to liberalize or negotiate commitments in service sector, they will classify what type of legal service, for instance, they're talking about. Well, they will first identify the code that actually corresponds to the type of service or the sector or subsector, and then they can now disaggregate depending on which activity within that profession they want to liberalize as well. So this is one of the classification. And when it comes to legal services, this is the class. These are the classes of legal services which can be subject to liberalization. So under legal services, a state party is not obliged to liberalize all classes of legal services. So you can choose one of them, and the rest is simply unbound. So here you have legal advisory and representation of services. You have legal advisory and statutory procedure of quasi-judicial tribunals. You have legal documentation and other legal advisory and information services. And within these, people can also, again, describe the type of activity. It could be legal and advisory services in domestic law, or it could be legal and advisory services in international law, foreign and international law. So when this is the case, country will say, either I will allow you to practice international law as a foreign service supplier, but only if you establish yourself under Mode 3. They will specifically say so. And they say, well, we wouldn't allow you to do that under Mode 1 because we don't want you to represent a client or to practice on a distance. You have to establish Mode 3. So this is, again, to let you know that countries are free to admit, and the conditions of admission are set by the admitting country or the host state. And they use this to schedule their commitments. I didn't write the language which are used to schedule commitment, but I will spell it out. So when countries do schedule commitment, there are usually two types of languages that are used. The first one is to say unbound. So when you see unbound, of course, the country is not bound under that service or mode of supply. The second language which is used is to use use the word none. And when you see none, N-O-N-E, that means there is no restriction. That is totally liberalized. And they can use other languages, the conditions we mentioned, and the qualifications that they want to use in terms of admission of that service and service supplier. And of course, you may have I should have had an example of a schedule of concession here, but unfortunately I don't. So there are 4 columns that are used to schedule commitment. The first one addresses the sector. The second column addresses the market access, and the second column addresses the national treatment. And of course, the fourth column is additional commitment. So whenever countries schedule their commitment, they will write the sector in one column, they will write the market access commitment under the second column, whether it's Mode 1, Mode 2, Mode 3, or Mode 4. Under national treatment, they will write the same thing, Mode 1, Mode 2, Mode 3, Mode 4, whether it's none or unbound, and then the fourth column will be dedicated to other additional commitment they want to also include in their liberalization. And this is usually in the terms of the form of additional commitments, the fourth column. So you cannot use the fourth column to be more restrictive. If you want to be restrictive, you will use column 1, column 2, and column 3, which are dedicated to market access and national treatment. So, and thank you for your attention.